Discrimination may range from such behavior as joking at somebody, making fun of somebody, to very systematic oppression, even violence may be a result of discrimination. Discrimination is a means of preserving the unequal status of the minority group and the disproportionate power of the majority. You see, discrimination is there in order to maintain the existing inequalities, to maintain the superiority of the people in the majority group, in the majority ethnic group. We can distinguish two types of discrimination: attitudinal and institutional. The attitudinal discrimination refers to discrimination practices that stem from prejudicial attitudes. It is usually very direct, visible, and dramatic. You show that you are discriminating somebody with your attitude. I mean, somebody can easily tell if you are, prejudiced and if you are really discriminating them. You may say, look, everyone who is older than 45 shouldn't apply for this job. Are you acting attitudinally? Well, are you attitudinally discriminating people older than 45? Absolutely. Okay, like I said, attitudinal discrimination is very direct, visible, and has very explicit negative consequences for people whom you are discriminating against. Speaking of institutional discrimination, this now reflects organizational practices and societal trends that exclude the minorities from economic opportunities and from the positions of power and prestige. Imagine a company that would hire only Kazakhs. They wouldn't really hire Uzbeks, Uyghurs, Russians, or Chechens or whatever. Now, if an organization is doing that, then this organization would be the best example of institutional discrimination. All right? Unfortunately, in real life, we have lots of organizations, institutions, even whole, governments, which discriminate institutionally representatives of certain ethnic groups. So institutional discrimination is more complex and less visible than attitudinal discrimination. And obviously, it's much more impersonal. People who are discriminating you institutionally, they have nothing against you personally. You may be a nice person, but just because you belong to a particular disprivileged ethnic group, this organization may not hire you. They may not show you very good service or whatever. Now let's look at the patterns of racial and ethnic relations. Okay, we looked at how the minorities and the majorities relate to each other. All right, now let's look at some of the patterns, some of the key patterns of interaction between the majority and the minority. The efforts of the dominant groups to create and to maintain their positions of power have been expressed in many different patterns of racial and ethnic relations, ranging from violent conflict to peaceful coexistence. All right, so there are examples where ethnic minorities and ethnic majorities would hate each other. Some countries, they would, institutionalize special policies in order to expel, in order to exterminate, to get rid of ethnic minorities. On the other opposite side of the spectrum, we see examples where the majorities and the minorities, they peacefully coexist. They respect each other. There are lots of examples of interracial marriages, interethnic marriages. They have a culture that has combined the best features of both the minority and the majority groups. Okay, so these are the patterns of racial and ethnic relationships that we will be talking about now. So the first on our list is the most dramatic, is the most negative way of dealings between the majority and the minority. It's called as extermination. The most repressive and destructive dominant group pattern of majority-minority relations is extermination or genocide, which denies the subordinate groups very right to live. You basically say that the ethnic minorities have no right to live in this country. Okay, by saying this, the country's leaders, the politicians, they will take steps, immediate measures, in order to either kill all the ethnic minorities or force them to exile. And this is exactly obviously you remember this. This is exactly what happened in the Nazi Germany, and then it happened in fascist Italy and other parts of the Western Europe and Eastern Europe during the Second World War. Since genocide violates the sanctity of human life, an ideology of racism is often developed to justify genocidal actions. So what is racism? Racism causes genocide. In other words, racism is a justification for genocide. Now, racism involves a belief in the inherent superiority of one racial group and the inherent inferiority of others. Okay, so this is an ideology backed with numerous beliefs, philosophical teachings, writings, probably even some religions may justify racism. Some people went to such an extent that they have published, that they have done, some scientific research to prove that one race is far more superior than other races. And this is the reason why that the former should exterminate, should conduct genocidal actions against the later. Its primary function is to provide a set of ideas and beliefs that can be used to explain, rationalize, and justify a system of racial domination. Another pattern of interaction between the majority and the minority is what sociologists call as expulsion and exclusion. The process of expulsion, изгнание, right? In Russian it sounds as изгнание, is the ejection of minority groups from areas controlled by the dominant group. Expulsion can be of two types, direct and indirect. Direct expulsion occurs when minorities are forcibly ejected by the dominant majority, often through military or other governmental forces. That's what the Nazi Germany did, right? What they did was they forced all the Jews to exile. They either put them into concentration camps or they basically forced them to leave the country. This is an example of direct expulsion. Indirect expulsion, косвенное изгнание, occurs when harassment, discrimination of minority becomes so intense that the members of the minority group choose to, quotation marks, voluntarily, emigrate, voluntarily leave the country dominated by the majority groups. How can this be done? How can this be achieved? Now, the country may pass laws that would be extremely discriminatory towards the minority groups. There would be so many examples of institutional discrimination that minority group members wouldn't be able to get a job, they wouldn't have a right to go to school, they wouldn't be able to have a right to, to health care, and this sort of stuff. So what else is there for them to do? Of course, the only way to survive, the only way to live a decent life would be to basically, emigrate from that country.